And we are back with the latest political panel. I am Linday McCoy. You know what? Political parties and candidates, they always reach out to minority groups. They make promises. And sometimes a lot of the messaging doesn't even scratch the surface on some of the issues that the Black community is facing. So this week, we are taking a deeper look into the politics of being Black. As we are at the end of celebrating Black History Month, we do not want to let this subject get away, as a lot of folks are watching how the politics played out in the last election cycle. So thank you so much for being here. Joining me this week on a special edition of the 21 News Political Podcast and panel, I am joined now by some very well-known leaders here in the community when it comes to the African-American community in the Mahoning Valley. We have CIRV Coordinator Guy Burney and Warren City Councilman and Pastor Todd Johnson. Thank you for taking the time to join me here for the political panel.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
Our pleasure.
Yes, Pastor Johnson, I'd like to start with you.
Sure.
Where do you see political rhetoric, the messaging missing the mark when they reach out to the Black community? Do you feel that they address the group as a whole without considering individuals and different circumstances among different groups, families, and communities?
I do think that a lot of political messaging misses the nuance of the Black community and the diversity that exists. We are not a monolithic group. We have a diversity of experiences, outlooks, upbringings, socioeconomic differences, and particularly amongst generations. There are different ways that we view life based off how we were raised or what we experienced as we were coming along into adulthood. And I sometimes feel that the messaging is often very generic, sometimes a little paternalistic and condescending, like there's just a tick box of a couple of things you say to Black people, and that will somehow impress us. Most of us who've been in this system for a little while, especially in this 21st century, we're really not impressed with that. We could kind of speak those words for the politician. We want to hear more nuanced details about the concerns that touch everyday life. And I think that that doesn't happen from the either political parties, quite frankly. And honestly, we sometimes perpetuate that amongst our own leadership and groups that represent us because we kind of push the same generic narratives as well and kind of feed those persons or groups what to say to us, those political parties. And it just becomes like an echo chamber of the same repeated, rehearsed lines where we have particular issues around employment or the economy or justice issues that may not fit within those campaign speeches or slogans. And we want to talk about them like adults and like people who have a nuanced perspective. And I think that, quite frankly, sometimes it feels like Black intelligence is insulted and our Black experiences melded together in a way that doesn't serve us when these campaigns come along and when these issues come about.
And Guy, I'd like you to piggyback on that because you're shaking your head like, yeah, this happens. And when I say, we hear a lot about the setbacks that the Black community is facing in these campaign messages and promises and the promises that are made, but they're not tailored sometimes to any individual. It's just a larger group. And aren't there layers of different issues that folks are facing?
Yeah, so we're many times painted into one large mass. And I think that is one of the negative pieces that we see constantly. Culture, there's a show called The Addams Family. A lady named Morticia Addams, she says, normal is an illusion. She says, what's normal for the spider is chaos for the fly. Right. Which simply means what is okay for me where I sit in my place of power, influence, economics, for the person who has a different experience, it's chaotic. So what we must understand as politicians when making decisions, have to make decisions not just for one group, one particular economic entity, but they have to realize that decision affects so many other people in so many ways. And so you can have, we're talking about Black people, so that's why you can have so many different opinions inside of our community because some people are spiders and some people are flies.
Right.
What would be the biggest issue or some of the top ones that you thought didn't even get any traction or acknowledgement or aren't getting what they need from the politicians this past election cycle? There has to be stuff that they left behind or they just, grazed across the surface.
I think one serious one that I don't want to say was not addressed, but was not given specific local attention on what it would actually look like. And that's economy and housing and how that affects African Americans and their upward mobility and opportunity to thrive in this day and age. And again, a lot of people can promise to build houses or lower the price of groceries and all that, but we know that that is far more complicated than just a campaign promise and a platform. And many of my peers, you know, I'm in my early 40s, and those who are lower, we know how wildly difficult it is to even enter into the sector of home ownership or exist in long-term employment, gainful employment that is on a track to retirement and all of that than it was 30 or 40 years ago. Our community has not really changed under either administration at the local level. You know, we can't see it. Some do a better job of selling their positions better than another, but at the same time, that young black man would say the hoods look the same no matter who was in control. It hasn't really changed, and we haven't seen that radical difference. So I think that it's about, again, the nuance of not just who we are, but the nuances of the plans and what that looks like at a micro level. And again, a national politician has to make a national pitch. But at our local levels, our state levels, the representatives, the people, what will it look like for me after you've been in office for 3 years or 6 years or 4 years or whatever? And I think that that's a part of the nuance that, as I said earlier, sort of insults our intelligence when we don't get it, when we just get the broad sides. And we could use more in that way so that we can not only hear you, but see how we can be a part of it as you move forward.
And Guy, what would be an issue for you that you work with a lot of the younger generations, and that was a group that voted differently? I'll get to that in the stats, but what did the politicians maybe, or even the lawmakers that are already in office, not pay attention to lately?
So we're human, and so basic needs is a driver of what we do. And so we can jump around voting, but we're voting because we have needs. And if those needs haven't been met, as Pastor Johnson said, by anyone, then we're going to listen for someone who tickles our ear that says, maybe I can meet this need. So we have needs. My place is violence, as you know. So I look at ways we reduce violence in our city and many other cities. And there's so many needs that we have. You know, do I walk out in my neighborhood and feel safe? Right? Not if I am safe, do I feel safe? That's critical. Right. So how people think about safety is critical. Can I work in my neighborhood and achieve and feel success?
Do I feel I can?
Do I
Because
feel like
sometimes the reality can be there. Like you said, it's
Absolutely.
a lot about feeling. And that's what these politicians, unfortunately, what we see right now, they were able to tap into the feelings of people, sometimes overriding reality
They
in very
understand the
dynamic ways.
psychology of
Very
human
much.
beings.
Yes.
And so, but if I feel these ways, understand that there's a behavior that follows these feelings.
Correct.
And that behavior then it can be a demise to a community because I feel like I have to fight or do something that may be a negative behavior to get what I need. Right. And so it's critical that I love what Todd said, at the local level, start to deal with these things because it's environment. Right. And all environments are different. Now we have hope because we understand there's something that I work with called protective factors. And what it says is if I have risk factors or I have these things going on in my community, the people there, the people who have power, the people who work can create these protective factors that I'm not influenced as much by these risk factors, and I can still be successful. And so those are critical elements that we certainly need.
When I say, what you've noticed, I also want to know, where have they not delivered? So at the local level, what are you still waiting on? And what do you think really is something that would take you to the next level of seeing progress, especially among the youth? Because you work with them, very intimately, and they are dealing with unique circumstances at home that some may understand and some may not understand. Right. And that goes through any community, but any funding or programs or support that's not happening that was promised?
Well, I think that we always need resources. One of the modes of complex change is that I have resource. And if I don't have resource, I can have everything else, but it won't work. Right? And so there's this model of change that I work with. And the first part of that is we need vision. So people need to see where they want to be. So I need to touch it, feel it, see it, And if not, I'm going to have a hard time maintaining the discipline and the consistency that I need to change my life, right? And so those are critical elements, those resources, that vision. Even now, the next piece is more than that, is I need the skill set.
Yes.
You just said it. Maybe my house didn't have everything I needed, but that's cross-cultural. That happens because of economy and economics. But now, where do I go to get that skill set so I can change what I'm doing and maintain it? So all of those pieces are very important, and we have to have them all in place. So as Pastor Johnson and I work on the ground at churches, we can work with people, but we need our politicians, we need our council folks, we need our Board of Educations to be going in the same direction. Right. Because we need everybody, because it is layered to fix it.
Would it be easier to go through the school districts with some of this, or that's already being done in some fashions, but what would you say would be more effective?
I think the wonderful thing is there are some phenomenal programs that exist. There's a lot of movement happening in our school districts that we're very proud of. Both Youngstown and Warren in particular are seeing we have some of the best resource schools. Now, what can we do to work beside families to take full advantage of what is available to them? And how can we, as Pastor Burney said, provide right models? For instance, the reintroduction of trades and pushing that again, which is a phenomenal economic opportunity. And we have seen an incredible generational downturn in trades among the Black community. How do we properly market, properly model what it looks like? How do we put that middle class family in front of that young man and show them this is where you can be in short order if you pursue this? In the same way that college was pushed on my generation through a different world, and we saw these models of the high school, of the college graduates, and then we all ended up in debt. You know,
they said, you got to go to school, and now you got to pay a bill.
But now there's another, and we need to find the same attractive mechanism, and it takes resources again. It takes partnership to make that happen.
The Associated Press did a breakdown of the voting data from 2024, and you both alluded to the politicians know how to talk to the voters. So what do you think happened during 2024 with the presidential election and then down ticket? Because especially for the presidential race, they found 8 in 10 Black voters supported Harris, which was down from 9 in 10 from the last presidential cycle. And Trump doubled his share of the young Black men vote compared to his 2020 election results. So why did maybe even the younger voters sway that direction? What do you think was happening locally?
I'd like to throw a couple quick hits at that. First of all, I do think, unfortunately, genderism played an issue in that in some ways. But I also believe that President Trump cuts a figure and has always cut a figure of that radical, rebellious kind of image that many young Black people appreciate, because even from the best of those who we might agree with more on policy, it does feel a lot like the same old and broken promises over decades. And we're sometimes somewhat revolutionary as a people, and even if it's not in our best interest, people will just kind of chase that image. But I also want to say that the power centers and the influence of our communities is more diluted than ever before. And many of those who usually hone in our communities go to the same places: our churches, our civic and our civil organizations, civil rights organizations, that do not have the same sway with younger generations than they do people 50, 60 and over. And that's a massive mistake that we're making within our community, and obviously those who are trying to come in. Most people who come to my church, we're one of those major churches where a politician would want to visit in our city, and they always kind of call, or they're coming through. There are only so many people coming to church anymore, listening to church or the minister as that voice of authority. Those of us who have been in this system or are tied to that older generation, this is all we know. What the ministers say, what the civic groups and civil rights groups say is all there is. Most of our younger generations under the age of 40 are not paying any attention whatsoever what our civil rights groups and churches. And by the way, I made this point at a banquet recently that our Black churches and many of our Black civil rights groups occupy the same space in young Black lives, which is not much space at all. And so they're almost parallel entities that don't have the same level of influence that they once had, and are struggling to connect with our younger communities more than they once did. But that's still the same pipeline for politicians. And I want to add just in, because all politics is local, and that politician or that party can only be so present, it really has a lot to do with the local representation of those movers and shakers and influencers. And sometimes we have our own issues of disconnect. It could be stubbornness. We could be stuck in our own ways and not connecting with the way things are done, and or the way messaging needs to be pushed, or perhaps just sitting and not messaging anymore and just listening. And if I'm very frustrated with the person who comes and represents a candidate, I'm not going to be that on fire for that candidate. And sometimes we have to have an honest inter-community conversation about the representation and the, there's a word I'm looking for, when you stand in for somebody, that those persons are here to push that message, but that person might not be as connected to their own community as they think they are, particularly with younger generations. I always say presence overrides platforms and programs. And just like politicians don't come around until every 4 years, so do many of our civic and civil rights organizations only come around until it's time to punish, push, guilt, and try to force young people to vote when we haven't been heard all throughout the year. And then they'll say, well, you got to go to the polls because grandmama marched for this. And that's not exactly the same message that resonates with a 30-something who's eligible to vote.
And a lot of the, the campaigning, it went, around on the podcast circuit too. So the younger
Correct.
people listening to that.
And can I say that we missed the boat on that in a big way? And some of us younger ones have said for several years, social media, podcasting.
Oh yeah, that's the future.
No, we knock on doors, we go to churches. Well, President Trump and conservatives have been very strong catching young white populations and young black populations on podcasts and social media.
Well, Guy, I'll let you have the last word here on the panel, because that's why we do this here. We allowed to open up the conversation. It allows for more, back and forth and just organic conversation that you wouldn't have on the TV news, because I'm under a time constraint. Every 5 minutes, that producer's in my ear like, hurry up. So, but I want to know, what are your thoughts when you look at what happened, where we are now? What do you hope to see? Because you say you're not getting the resources you need, and I'm just curious, do you agree that maybe the boat was missed by some of the politicians, or do you think it's more than that?
Oh, I think it's a lot. It's layered. Mm-hmm. And so remember, resources, we've been clamoring about resources forever. Mm-hmm. So that's not excuse.
It's nothing new.
Now, right. I want to say that as well, because relationship can outweigh resources if we're connected.
Correct.
And so there's a guy, Dr. Comer, this is what he says. He says, no significant learning occurs without significant relationship. And so I think in our communities everywhere, there has to be a fill gap, a reconnection generationally, especially in our Black community. We've lost that.
Yes.
We used to be where grandmother, mother, father, cousins, were all in the same home, and they were connected. They were connected all the way through. And so now I have historical information, I have energy, I have everything going at the same time. When we disconnect that in our community, we lose things. I think that, just to answer and piggyback off of Pastor Johnson, I think there was also a large disconnection of voice.
Very true.
Where people did not participate because they were so disconnected. They were so worried about survival. They're so worried about other things and other influences that this just kind of went past a lot of people. Right. And so I think with what he said, there has to be a reconnection of thought, of voice, of generations, so that a voice can be heard and we can make the right decision. Do not get it wrong. Voting, the way this country works,
yes,
we must participate. Resources on the line, information is on the line, knowledge is on the line.
Democracy is on
Democracy is, yeah, so we have to participate in it.
Right.
Again, I'm not saying one side or other. I'm just saying you cannot be represented if you don't participate.
All right, well, hopefully they're listening, and we've got our voices out there for all to hear. I really appreciate you joining me right here on the 21 News political panel. Again, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
We're going to have much more here on the YouTube channel and on the 21 News app. So if you want to watch these, make sure you click subscribe, and you can also watch this on WFMJ.com.